Maria, I wanted to ask you a question. For the government isn't hiring right now, and so there's a lot of interest in jobs, so sorry to get right at the hiring question. Given that environment and also our current continuing resolution for the budget, how will that affect getting a job going forward?
Sorry. Very good question. There's a lot of unknowns right now because of the freeze. However, what I can tell you is that many positions are being exempt. Therefore, there is still hiring going on. So if you see a posting, apply for it, because for the most part, we are still moving on with the process up to the point of right before you issue a temporary job offer or a tentative job offer. And so things are still moving. In regards to the continuing resolution, we really have no idea what's going to happen. But what I've known from previous experience in the government is that hiring will always occur somehow. So do not let that stop you from looking for opportunities and applying for jobs that you see that are open.
Great question. I was just wondering, do you have a certain amount of time that you require a person to be stationed on a base or an area in order to consider them as an applicant?
Yes, any time requirement?
Another good question. Typically, there isn't one, but what we like to say is that we would like that you are here for at least 6 months.
Thank you.
So it's kind of for all of you, but it's sort of, again, it's about timing. But a lot of you talked about transitioning and setting up, people mentioned the timeline for transitioning between duty stations. Can you speak to sort of your own personal, when do you start freaking out about not having a job? And for me, I kind of give myself the first 3 months to get settled and sorted before I start really getting nervous. Can you all speak to sort of what your own timeline is or what you recommend?
My comment is that I just kind of tried to keep going with the business I already had. So I don't know if this really applies, but it was, yeah, I was like in process.
Lindsay, you're amazing to wait and give yourself those 3 months. I'm the kind of person who, if I don't have like a lead or some idea of what I might roll into 3 months before we PCS, I'm freaking out. So as soon as we get orders, I start networking immediately. As soon as I hear about orders, this is Lindsay's my connection here. I reached out to her. She is connected with the co-owner of my former employer, and I said, Lindsay, we might come to Yokosuka, but don't tell Donna. And so anyway, that's what I do. I cut myself slack as much as possible, but I start networking immediately.
I would agree. I knew we were going to be here about a year before I came. So that's when I started looking and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I think it's the same as I had mentioned before. Talk to as many people as you can, solicit ideas. Not assuming that somebody's going to give you a job, but asking what they would do, seek out people who have been in similar positions. I know as soon as we found out we were coming here, my wife started worrying, so that I think transitioned over to me worrying too.
Sorry, that made me think. Also, don't be afraid to go back and ask the same person who you had an initial contact with, because especially if they're in the military spouse community and network, because sometimes they get busy too. I got one job because I had asked a woman, like the 6-8 months out, and then I got on ground and nothing was coming through. And I remembered, she PCS'd in the middle of that. I'm just going to reach back and ask if she ever followed up. And sure enough, she's like, oh, I let that kind of slip through. Let me follow up. And that's how I got that job.
I'm not going to lie, I freak out. Like right when we find out we're getting orders. In fact, I've always been a very career-driven person, even before I met my husband, and that progressive employment is really important to me. But I think that being financially responsible and planning ahead of time makes it less scary, so that if I didn't work for a year, that we would be okay. And I know that's not a reality for everyone, but if it is a reality for you, planning is important. But and keep in mind that you can apply for jobs using your military preference 30 days before you PCS to your next location. The only thing is that you can't be, you cannot be hired onto a position until you actually reach your next PCS location, but you can start applying 30 days before. So I thought that would be an important tip.
I think we have a lot of really driven and ambitious people on our panel, but I think the question is, depending on your personality and what your position in your career is, and also with your family life and family balance, are you focusing right now on young children? Do you have children in high school or college? Do you have it's just you and your spouse? And I think that will also largely determine what your course of action will be, and also your finances. Some people really don't have a choice to wait around 2 or 3 months, and others have that luxury. So, you know, for me personally, right now I'm still a planner. I want to know a few months before I leave. I want to start looking at things. I want to buff up my resume, and then as soon as I get there, I want to interview. And that's why it was really scary for me after I left Rota, Spain, because I wasn't good about keeping up my career. That's why 4 months into being in my new place, I was petrified. So won't let that happen again.
So for me, I didn't really freak out because we have both agreed that I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. So when we arrived in Japan, I really just spent my time, you know, hanging out at the gym, you know, like building friends. Yeah, that's like my killer time before, was to hang out with my toddler to the gym and shop. So yes, that was just my favorite thing to do, and I didn't freak out because, like, you know, it's like we want to have our kids to be bigger enough to go to school, where I want to start maybe going back to school or getting a job. So and right now I started my business first, so I don't, you know, I didn't have plan any before, but now that I have my business already, I already have plan on how to work on our next move, which is going to be in 2020. So I'll have 3 more years here. So I have 3 more years to play around, and for my environment, my job, I don't really, my time during the daytime is consumed by my kids. So on the daytime, I am full-time mother until 8 o'clock when it's bedtime, and then I work from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock midnight to communicate with my customers. So I don't respond so much on messages on the daytime. I respond at nighttime, which is weird, but I'm just being a mom and love to watch my kids climbing everywhere. Yes.
I don't know if this is going to apply to too many people, but I have a question about the military spouse preference. I'm not listed on my husband's orders. We got married after we received his orders. I got approval to come here, like a separate form. I've heard I don't get the military spouse preference because I'm not on his orders. Is that true?
I would probably have to take talk to you a little bit more about that, but it's true. If you were not married prior to, then typically you don't get it.
My question is actually kind of more volunteer. It'll kind of go a little to businesses as well. But Jill, when doing your volunteerism throughout your career, I have many employment gaps being a military spouse, but I have a lot of volunteer filling in those gaps. How do you say is the best way to represent that on a resume? Do I represent that as a job, so filling those time slots and then doing bullet points, or doing it later, because I know there's lots of different ways of representing your resumes nowadays. Do I do that at the end on all volunteers and putting them together so that I get more maybe meat, I guess you could put?
This is a great question. So I think, where do you put your volunteer experience and these odds and ends that are outside the box, and how do you fit them into a very boxed resume where we typically, you know, depending on what you're doing, it has to go in order. And I think I'm going to let you guys answer this, but I also think that's going to be a great segue into the exercise that Lynn's going to do with us in a few minutes. But we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts first.
I'm happy to start, but I want to hear what other people think too. So I recommend putting the meat together, as you put it. I think of it the same way, and always putting what's most relevant to the job you're applying for at the front, however you got that experience. So the bullet points I listed off, that was my first entry for the resume I submitted to this position. It wasn't my most recent employment, but the way I structured my resume for this application was to lean on the experience that was relevant for the position. It does help cover those gaps. It shows the experience and like how you filled your time, and that demonstrates the skills that employers are looking for as well. So that's a really specific example, but I want to see if other people have things to share.
So for the most part, your resume doesn't matter, which is becoming increasingly apparent in today's world of online applications. So to me, the only idea is, what do you need to say to get in the door? And whether you were hired for a position that you're getting paid for, or you were selected for a volunteer position, or you just said, hey, this is something that I'll do. It's putting down on an online application or on your physical printed resume, these are the skills that I have to present. And then should you be selected for an interview, if you need to clarify, if they have questions about, oh, was this a job or was this volunteering, that's your opportunity to frame it however you would like. But essentially the way that I look at it is that you just need to be able to get in the door and then let your own story tell everything else that needs to be said.
So the way that I would, for government, your resume is everything, especially for federal government. And I can't stress that enough, because the more you put in there, and there's no, you can have different, so it's different from the private, because the private, they want you 1 to 2 page resumes. The federal government, if you had a 10-page resume, they wouldn't care less. So the more the better. And if you were looking for a government job, and this is actually my first federal government job, I've always worked for local government, but you would want to, depending on your experience, you would want to put your volunteer, and you said you have gaps, you would want to put it in the body of your resume. And make sure that you use specific words that really sell that volunteer position, and put yourself in the HR professional's shoes. Like, sometimes using the right words is everything. We can smell a lie from 5 miles away, or something that's been overly sold. So you want to sell yourself, but don't make it too much so that it's like if you were working at, if you were helping at the thrift shop, you didn't own your own thrift shop. You weren't the owner. So just make sure it's truthful, but you'd want to put it in the body. If you have a strong resume with employment already, then maybe the volunteer part can come on the bottom of your resume. But for the gaps, please put your volunteer opportunities there as a job.
I've done both. I think it depends on how significant your contribution to that volunteer organization is. And if you can substantiate that, I know USO, Fleet and Family Service, Red Cross, we have actual physical records and databases that we can pull up and print and offer people letters of appreciation, letters of recommendation. And when you do a lot of hours, like over 10 a week, I definitely would put that in the body of a resume. If it's something small, you're doing maybe 4 or 5 a month, maybe put it at the bottom. That's just a general rule, not counting government resumes, but civilian resumes. That's what I would do.
So for government resumes, I understand, I've been building mine, but then there's also positions that are not government or private sector. Is it okay to use the same resume, just change it up to, detail, to kind of correlate towards that position, or should I just have 2 entirely separate resumes?
Very different. Very, very different. In fact, for me, I have 5 different resumes. Every time I apply for a job, I change the whole thing up based on what they're requiring and what what I can sell about myself. So you can copy and paste some things, but if you gave a private employer a federal resume, they would probably not read it. And just as a general rule of thumb, for the most part, HR professionals, I think in general, really only spend about 20 seconds looking at resumes unless there's something in the beginning that really catches our eyes. So just be, have a friend look at your resume and say, hey, does it look strong? And just give them literally 30 seconds to look at it. That's a good way of determining whether your resume is interesting from the first page.
Right. I'm probably not the only mom in the room, and also short duty stations for my husband, like a 9-month training here or a year there, and has also technically been able to work in certain locations. What's the current recommendation for how you deal with that on a resume and or in an interview? What do you say? You don't just say, I have 2 kids. This is the years that I had kids. I know they're not really allowed to ask if you have kids, but you can't really avoid the topic. It's awkward. How do you handle that?
So I have prepared answers to this question before when I went through my doctoral interview to get into school, and I simply tell them I have no problem being at work on time and committing, and I would love if you would call my previous employer and they could tell you how excellent my record of punctuality and dedication is. I was able to manage and blah blah blah. You list what you were able to manage, whether it was my husband was deployed for 12 months and I had 2 young children and I was able to work consecutively without missing any work days, or just basically tell them how great you are and how you were able to handle all of this, and give them references. Say, hey, it's not a problem. I got it under control.
I haven't answered this question personally yet, but I have worked with a number of spouses who were in the situation that you describe. So I just want to say tips like this are just invaluable, and talk to each other, get tips like that, because it happens and people get jobs, and from 9-year gaps to 5-year gaps of no paid employment and maybe not even volunteer experience during certain times when the tempo of your life is just too busy. That's fine. It happens. So learn from each other. I want to plug that. And I've worked with amazing people who have had those gaps.